What's important for a conference like this is that you can get academic research providing an evidence base, informing policymakers like myself to give us the tools by which we can make the right judgments so that we deliver on the ground.
Children are absolutely fundamental, because we would argue that it's not just about the well-being of children being born in the 21st century, but it's also about the implications of children's well-being and their circumstances for future generations. In other words, if you don't tackle childhood poverty, you don't break the cycle of poverty generally. And this turns out to be a much bigger challenge than we had imagined, say, 40, 50 years ago, when we actually thought that there were some recipes for poverty reduction that were relatively straightforward.
It's a really good moment to take stock of the project and say, well, what have we got so far on these key issues around child poverty, what's causing child poverty, how it's being experienced, how it's changing, and what how policies are already impacting on it, and what policies and programs might improve the quality of our children's lives. Any project like Young Lives is always wrestling with the impossibility of putting all the shopping in the basket. So the challenge for this week is to actually get clearer on that and say, can we project these children into the future over the next 5 years and say, which are the issues for these children that we need to be studying, and what are the changes in their lives affected to their situation, their communities, right through to the global economic downturn and climate change that might mean we need to measure different things.
It's quite common in marginalized and ethnic minorities areas in Vietnam that people get married quite early, at the age of around 14, 15, 16. And then have children quite right after that, and then their children grow up and also get married quite early. And then I can see that this is where the poverty circle begins and persists in community, especially in rural and mountainous area, and they face a lot of difficulties because of health issue, because of lack of sanitary and water, and then they become poor.
Violence is present very much in their lives. They sometimes are punished physically by their parents, but also by their teachers, and sometimes bullying by their classmates.
I think we need to ask the communities where poverty exists, what are the meaningful directions of development that you would like to see promoted, rather than assuming we know that get them into school and all will be well.
Parents are very aware that if they put their kids into primary school certification gets you absolutely nowhere, especially if, as a poor child, you're in the poorest section of the poor schools. And so you need to get access to secondary education for primary education really to make a difference. And so there's a very big challenge ahead, I think, for the team in drawing on the results of what we're learning in the education research community for this project.
The life of a young child coming from a poor family starts to have a different experience at a very young age of 3 because of the type of school that the child attends, and one of the choices made by the parents in terms of which school the child attends to.
This demographic dividend comes once in the history of a nation. We are in the middle of that, and it's absolutely critical that the investments that Young Lives is asking for are actually made. If that does not happen, we will not have a demographic dividend, we will have a demographic nightmare.
We have to start with the relevant stakeholders like governments and see their perspective. I think that's what that's emerging in the discussion, that we have to take into consideration existing policies, identify the gaps, and then engage those policy and decision makers in the process, both in the research and in the implementation.
But I actually still think that for a lot of the developing world, from an economic point of view, their prospects is actually not too bad. But that means it's even more important what we do now with marginalized groups. It's always in depressions and recession periods that across the world, that's when they're actually the crucial moments. If we can keep on protecting certain vulnerable and poorer groups, then we can actually make them strong enough that when recovery comes, they can take part of it. But actually these groups may well suffer most, and then when things start picking up again, they may well remain excluded for a long time, often for a generation. So I'm relatively optimistic, but it is important just in these kind of times, not just to naively say, oh, let's wait until the recovery starts. You know, there's certain groups that we may lose now, again for a whole generation.
We have to open up the concept of the MDGs beyond 2015. There is support for it, they cover essential elements, but we have heard valid criticism and suggestions of how to change them. So the worst thing we could do, I believe, in 2015 is to just extend the period and change the numbers, the targets. That would be the worst. We really have to open up this whole agenda and be open to the results that will come out of the longitudinal surveys of the Young Lives and other sources to really look at different dimensions and give it a different shape, and probably we will come up with a different name because the millennium has moved on.
There's been a tendency to focus too much on economic growth per se, boosting economic output, as if that was the end in itself, as opposed to being concerned about what that then delivers in terms of improved lives and life opportunities for children. So I think we need to be as much concerned with the distribution of increased wealth as we are with increasing wealth per se. And I think one of the findings of the Young Lives research is that there's lots of inequality, not just between girls and boys, but between different ethnic groups, between caste groups and so on. And frequently it's the most marginalised, the poorest groups that are really cut out of the economic benefits that other members of their societies are enjoying. I think the other thing which is really important is to think more politically about the problems of child poverty. I mean, children remain in poverty because quite frankly, key governments around the world don't really feel accountable, feel the heat when they don't actually improve their circumstances. And we need to create some kind of popular constituency in those countries and indeed globally so that governments feel much more accountable for delivering better outcomes for children.
Segregation is growing, and you have a very large percentage of children who feel they do not belong to those places where they were born. And if you grow up like that, you cannot talk about citizenship, democracy, and even human rights, because people simply don't feel human. That's what our street children tell us all the time in Brazil. I would just like to be seen as a person. I am a person too. Look at me as a person. People approach me and think I'm going to attack them, so I'm not being seen as a person. How kids like these will grow up feeling they belong to that country, to that city, or to that neighborhood? I don't know.